G'day, Tim. Welcome to Landscape Photography World. How are you going?
I'm doing really well. Today, the last week or so, I had a head cold that my wife bequeathed me, and it's been a really boring one. It's nothing like COVID. I just cough, and then there's mucus, but you don't need to know all about that.
All right, fair enough. We'll try and avoid the mucus and talk more about photography. Why don't you talk a little bit about yourself and your radio career? Because a lot of people will know you from that aspect of your life. And then we can talk a little bit about how you got into photography and what place that holds in your life now.
Okay. So I used to listen to Double J when I was a lad. That's the ABC's youth station. And there was one particular announcer who I really liked, and his name was Russell Guy, and he was doing breakfast. And then he went away, and so I listened to this other guy for a week, and I didn't know, but I was already very good at listening as a skill. Like, even though we're here to talk about vision, I was good at, and still am good at listening. And I could pick apart his performance. And so running early from my bus, I turned off, schoolboy, turned off the radio and rang in because I knew the number because I used to ring up to win records.
Right.
And critiqued him, and I didn't know, but he put me live to air. And he said, anything else, after I'd given several critiques of him and his performance. And I said, oh, when's Russell coming back? Because he's much better than you. And he said, if you think it's that easy, you can come in tomorrow morning and do the breakfast show. And so the next morning, Mercedes pulled up outside my house at 5 o'clock and took me in. And in my school uniform, and I did the breakfast show before going off to school. And that's how I started. And I got a taste for it. And then, long story short, I worked my way through university doing midnight to dawns on Double J and then Triple J, and then I finished my degree. And rather than head down, it's in economics, rather than head down working in Treasury or the Reserve Bank, I decided that music and radio was much better, and so I chased that, and eventually that all fell into place.
Fantastic. It's a lot more fun, I think, playing with radio than playing with numbers.
Yeah, I was good at numbers.
Maybe less lucrative.
Yeah, well, yes. I was good with numbers, but I wasn't good with working in the abstract. I like things that are more real world kind of thing.
Sure. Fantastic. So when did photography start for you, and what was it about photography that made you start that passion that's still alive today?
It started in the days of analog, and while I was working at Double J, I'd moved out of home, and it was a very good setup. My girlfriend paid the rent, I did the cooking and the cleaning, and I was a university student, had no money. And I had a camera, and I started to take photos. We lived in Kirribilli, so I take photos of the bridge and things like that. Nice. And I expected nighttime photography, sort of longer exposure, and that was fun, and I really enjoyed it. My career started to blossom, and the cost of that passion is quite expensive. The cost of film,
in the film days.
Yeah. So I stopped taking photos, and then worked at Double J, Triple J, and I worked at Radio National for nearly a quarter of a century.
Wow.
And then towards the end of my Radio National days, well, the last 5 or 6 years there, I had become a senior manager, like a senior executive, and it wasn't creative. It's all about money and people. It's not about ideas. And I didn't know. Once you're on that path to improvement, supposedly improving your position in a company, you tend to get further away from the product you're making and more
the actual thing that you're all about, your organisation actually does.
And so I was a bit frustrated. I didn't know how frustrated I was at that. At the same time, this was when I'm about 50. At the same time, I'd had diabetes, and I was doing my 10,000 steps a day, and it wasn't getting the results that the doctor wanted. And so I thought, maybe I'll try cycling. Now, as a kid, I'd never ridden a bike because I was a very insular kid. I used to just read books and listen to music. And so my daughter, who had bought a bike for, I said, can you teach me how to ride? And she said, oh, sure. And she was about 10. And so I have a back lane out the back. It wouldn't be out the front, it'd be a front lane. There's a back lane out there, and I got a second-hand bike and said, okay, what do I do? And she said, you just go. And I said, no, I need more instructions. She said, no, you just go. And she got bored within 3 minutes. but being fat and 50, you're quite high off the ground to take your feet off the ground on a thing that you're not used to being on.
Center of gravity is not very low.
No. And so I just practiced pushing off and pedaling a bit. I couldn't turn around in the lane. I had to get off the bike and put it around. But I went up and down, and then I thought, all right, I'm going to start riding, and because Sydney's fairly hilly, and that's where I'm based in Sydney, and the hills, as it turns out, were very good for diabetes because you have to push really hard. It's that thing about, it's actually not about long, medium exercise. It's about short bursts of intense exercise.
Yeah.
So I started to ride, and I'd take my mobile phone with me, and I would take shots just to, I don't know why, just maybe to have a break in between. I can't even remember why I did it. And the result on phones back then, so this is 13 years ago, shots back then on phones were low light, were pretty shitty. And so I then started to post them on various social media, and it ended up being a way of making me go out, because it's either, it could be cold or I'm tired, but I built up in my own mind an expectation that people thought I was going to post that day. So that helped me get on the bike and get out there. We'll go back to diabetes. It worked. It helped me a great deal with my diabetic numbers, so that was all good. And eventually I went from a mobile phone to a shitty camera to an okay camera to a good camera. And with a good camera, I got a tripod. Well, if you've seen my work, it's obvious that I've got a tripod because it can be very dark.
Yep.
And it took me back. I'm also going to have to say, while I was on air on Triple J, I was also working in nightclubs. So I'd finish on air at 10 and started nightclubs at 11.
Yep.
And back in those days, they used to finish at 3 a.m. So I'd finish at 3. Everyone else had to rush home because they would get up the next day to work. I didn't.
That was me.
I was working an evening shift, so I could sleep a fair bit. So I would wander around the city by myself, wander down to Mrs. McCrory's chair, whatever, and just be by myself in a huge city. So I found that by cycling, and I couldn't cycle at night because I was too tired after what was a fairly intense job. So I found it easier. I could get up in the morning and cycle. And then I built up my kit over time to have the tripod, have different lenses. And I now have maybe about 10 lenses, and I travel with 4 at any given time in my little pack that goes on my bike. And I found that thing in my youth that I had, which was being by myself in the city I love, and there's no one else there. So I get to own Sydney, and it's really special. And I love older things as well. And I take photos of modern buildings a bit, but finding city alleyways that could be from the 1930s or from yesterday, things like that. And you also, the harbour is a fantastic backdrop for dawn. I don't actually like sunrise light. I find it too much and all the colours gone. So I like from before dawn to just before sunrise is my time.
Twilight, yeah.
And that's the time when, and there's much more colour at that time. And with production, you can make things even more appealing. And people think post-production, some people think it's cheating, but what I found it does, it allows me to see, or what I see, I can then replicate on the screen as I'm editing, because no camera is good enough as a human eye is to capture the complexity of a scene.
Absolutely.
So the skill is in post, making it be real.
Yeah. I think you do a great job. And I think it's also that, I guess, some of the unique subject matter, like the laneways, it's not a popular thing. I'm more of a seascape sort of person, so I'm usually at a beach somewhere. I was actually in the city today, this morning, for sunrise, which was quite a cracker, actually. It was a pretty good one. But I think it's some of those things that make your work quite interesting to look at. Each day, you're not sure what you're going to get out of Tim's feed. And sometimes it's a laneway, sometimes it's a beautiful sunrise over Blackwattle Bay or something like that. And so for me, it's always interesting to see what you're posting, because it is that little bit different. It's not necessarily the grand landscapes that a lot of landscape photographers go for. It's more that urban, grittier view that is something that I quite like. It's quite refreshing, I think.
Some people don't like it. Like I post on one Facebook site that I can't remember the name of it, something like Australia is awesome or something like that.
Oh yeah.
And,
I know the one.
and the people say, "What's awesome about that laneway?" And I go, I try not to. I try not to be rude, because rude. It's
Sure.
such an awful. Social media is such an awful place for rude people, because you don't need to encourage them at all.
No,
And it's
there's
supposed
plenty
to
of.
but I just went, and he said it in such ways that it could have been either sort of compliment or sort of facetious. And I think it was facetious, but I answered him as though it was a compliment, and he never replied back. So clearly it was facetious. I talked about the rule of thirds and the starburst and all this stuff, and he just didn't come back. So that was fine. But so when I start each day, because I naturally wake really early, I don't set an alarm. So I wake between 3:30 and 4. That's around then. Yep. And I have all my clothes set up so I don't disturb my wife and child. And I just get out, and I don't know where I'm going until I put the bike on the footpath out the front and go left or right, and then just go. And as the light starts to appear, because cycling is actually a very fast way to get about Sydney at that time of day, because traffic's
no traffic. Yeah.
And the only traffic that's there is usually professional drivers doing delivery of food or whatever.
Yeah.
So, and also because I'm old, I don't have to look cool. I don't mind having lights on my bike and wearing a coloured vest. I'm fine with that. But I just keep an eye going. I'm going, and I've got an app that says where the sun will rise, and so I look at it and go, okay, with these clouds that I'm starting to see in the dark, and that's where the sun's going to come up. Where can I go? Because I also know, because I'm out every day, unless it's a really miserable day, I know where, because the sun clearly moves throughout the course of the seasons, and I know both what time it'll be up and where it'll come up, and how that will line up with a particular shot. There's some great summer shots I can get from where Barangaroo Reserve is, of the first light coming up under the Harbour Bridge. And so I'd know not to go there in winter, because in winter it's going to be down south, and I'm not going to get
south. Yeah, it's round the corner.
And so it's just knowing the city. And a lot of what I do is quite repetitious, because I do visit the same sites, but every time I take a photo, and really it's a self-indulgent thing. Every time I take a photo, for me, it's about doing the best I can. And every time I take a photo, it's a bit better than the previous photo that I took from that spot. Now, it may look the same to people who have a look at it, but for me, it's different. And I constantly like the challenge of thinking about how I can, because I'm completely self-taught, watched a few YouTube videos to work out settings and things, but because I take bracketed photos and then meld them together to make them. And so I didn't know how to do that, because I'm also hopeless at reading manuals. I need to watch someone doing it on a screen. Manual just doesn't work for me. And so self-taught, the experience of being the first person, I'm the first time I'm me in that situation each time I'm in it, because I've learned a little bit more and can appreciate this. I'll think back to a photo I took of it and what wasn't perfect about it, and I go, okay, I can remember that I needed to be something, to do something with a camera or something with me, or be in a lower position in the tripod, and all those things. And it's just fun. So it's easy for me it's hard to get out of bed, but it's easy once I'm on the road, because I'm cycling, I'm looking about going, what can I see? What can I see? And because my career had previously been all about listening and my ear, I didn't nourish the visual aspect, because there wasn't one in what I did. And I found out that, without sounding like an egotist, I have an eye to be able to spot interesting things. This morning, I was on the Carl Expressway walkway thing, and I got out my camera and I was taking some shots of the harbour, and that was all nice. And then I realised, I've got my macro lens with me, and so I looked at some of the metal railings, and I thought, okay. And then I got some macro shots of the metal railings, and then when I was playing with them in post, the outcome is fantastic. I over accentuated everything just because it's meant to look like an abstract, but so I really went for it. And because I'm such an anal person, I rate every photo that I publish. And one is, I may not put it on social media. 2 is, it's good enough if it's a dry day. 3 is, that's worth posting. And 4 and 5 are great shots. And I got some 4s this morning, so that was good.
Nice. That's good. I was going to talk a little bit about or ask you to talk a little bit about your abstract work. One of the things I've noticed occasionally, particularly when it rains, is your focus on car windows or car mirrors and or various parts of cars that have raindrops on them. What's that about? Where did that passion come from? And is that just about trying to do something artistic and different, or
It
what?
actually has an origin. I was cycling out to go along, I was coming back from going along Botany Bay, and the sun was just coming up, and there was some play equipment that had been put in a park that I cycled past, and it was brand new play equipment, and it was all ultra vivid colours. And so I went over and I looked at it, and there was dew on it. And so I just didn't have my macro with me. I just got close with it. Not that it matters what it was, but it's my camera is a 2/3 sensor, so it was a 23mm lens, so it made it 35, and took some shots of it, and then came back home and looked at them in the computer and going, that's okay, but it's a bit boring. And I went, what if I just turn it up and turn it up a lot? So it's not meant to look like what I saw, it's meant to look like a painting or something.
Sure, sure.
And that really works because these things are so new, the colours are so bright, and that made me put then dew in my background, in my mind, of things to keep an eye on. And that dew only happens certain times of the year as well. Now's a good time for dew. And so when I'm cycling around, if I see a car with a street light in the right spot, because each bubble of either water from rain or water from dew can create light sparkles and things. And when you get close enough with a macro and you put the focus on one part and the other sides are both out of focus, it creates rainbows and things. And so it is definitely an art. Like, I'm trying to create art. I'm not trying to create a landscape. It's a thing to challenge my mind, to be playful. A lot of people don't get it. A lot of people love it. It's quite polarizing. And
polarizing can be good, though, because making people feel something or think something with art, I think, is one of the most important things about art.
I go and see things like Francis Bacon. I love seeing his work, and a lot of people just think he can't paint and it's morbid, but I see great things in it. Yes, you can see one painting there.
Yep.
And I'll just pick this up and turn around. There's another one there. So when I was a DJ, club DJ, you used to get paid cash, and it's now past the 7 years, so I can't get caught for saying this. And so rather than, you can't put it in the bank particularly because you get caught there, and people spend it on shoes, girls, or drugs. I bought art. So that's what I have art throughout my house because that's where the DJ money went. But back to art, yes, and I see my photography as probably three main things. One is a landscape that is beautiful. One is laneways that is chronicling Sydney's history. And one is this abstract thing that is me just being playful.
Nice. Yeah. No, I think it's a nice way of categorizing what you do. It's a really good summation. How much do you think your days or nights of working in the music industry have shaped how you perceive art? And you said you were good at listening and you didn't do a lot with your visual perceptions at that time, but now that's changed. What did you bring out of that music industry into your photography?
Strangely enough, and I think Double J and early Triple J speak to this quite vividly, that we were about experimentation and the things we were allowed to do. So there's very little telling us what to do. In fact, practically none at the beginning. None.
Definitely not.
Yeah. And so that went across into my club work, where most of the DJs just wanted to play hits because they kept people dancing on the dance floor.
Sure.
Because I'm not a stupid person, I don't think, I realised pretty quickly that it wasn't just about keeping the punters happy, it's about keeping the management happy. And keeping the management happy is A, having lots of people come in, and B, sending them to the bar every now and then. So I would drop down into playing some reggae and things, and in clubs would never hear that stuff. And half the dance floor might leave, but guess where they went? They went to the bar. And the management always liked that. And what it allowed me to do was express myself musically, which is about diversity, while other people, what stopped me being a DJ was techno, because it isn't about diversity, and it is just about that constant beat in that 130 beats per minute kind of thing. And I'm fine with people who love it. That's absolutely fine, but I don't love it. And it also coincided with me getting married, and I'd had enough of staying up, because in the 80s, you could work 6 or 7 nights a week in clubs. So I've got 5 nights on air and then 6 or 7 in nightclubs. You're not going to have a very successful marriage unless the person doesn't want you around. But I was...
Or they come to the club.
She used to come to the clubs when they were closing to help me get stuff into the car or the taxi. But I was quite over that. And I think even though I have some friends, DJs, who still DJ, for me, I'd had my turn, I had my fun, I made some money, and to keep playing records to people who think they know what is good music when actually all they want to hear is what they already know, wears thin after a while.
Yeah, I get that.
But that doesn't answer the visual question. But what does was watching people leave the dance floor to go and get drinks. So I was always been an observant person, but most of that observation was done with my ears in Radioland. But then as I left that and went into management, you had to observe people, and you had to see what motivated them and what pissed them off, because the idea that a manager is superior, for me, is not what a manager is about. A good manager is someone who can manage the resources to get about the best result, which is, in the case of people making radio programs, quality programs with great ideas, especially at Radio National. So they tend to be quirky kind of people who do that work. So you've got to find ways of not condescending to them, but inspiring them by recognising their wealth and their worth to the project. And so that kind of looking for clues then has translated into my photography, where I'm constantly looking for clues. If I thought, all right, today I'm going to go to Clovelly Beach and I'm going to go on the headland and I'm going to take a photo of the clouds just before sunrise. It could be the most boring just before sunrise cloudy day. So I never make my mind up. I'm always just constantly looking about, going, what can I take from this? Where will it head me? And for example, when it's been rainy and I've heard the rain overnight, I'm going, I'm not getting up. And then I roll over and it's 4:30, say in summer when the sun comes up at 6:30, say that changes over time and daylight saving and all that. I'll go, all right, I don't have time to cycle there. I'll jump in the car and I'll go somewhere. And inevitably, I don't have as much fun because I've had that forced on me by a decision I made without the input of seeing what's going on. And even though I get a good shot, I'm not that excited by it because it wasn't that happenstance. And happenstance is a great thing, like a feeling of success for me.
Yeah, okay. I usually ask my guests, what does success look like in your photography? And it doesn't have to be commercial success or fame or anything like that. What does it mean to you to be successful in your photography?
I make very little money out of it. I don't do it for money. I like to be appreciated as a human being. Like, I prefer people to say, that's good and that stinks. I do compliments and likes and things like that. Makes me feel as though I've succeeded in taking something that someone else appreciates.
Sure.
So that's one measure. So it's the public's view of the work. And the other is just have I had a good time in my inputs to get that output? And which is why I would be very poor as a commercial photographer, because for me, it's not about just the output. It's not about the fun you have putting in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the things you mention quite often in your captions is the urban renewal that's going on, and that focus on some of those older parts of Sydney that are now being, for want of a better term, destroyed, wiped out, whatever. How much, I guess, the photography as being a tool to document change and the ability to promote conservation efforts. Have you thought about it in that way, or have you thought about trying to do something along those lines?
Absolutely. I took a lot of photographs of the Sirius building before it had been emptied, when there was still a chance we could keep it as social housing.
Yep.
And it's a fantastic building to take photos of as well. I'm going to cough. And it didn't make a difference. I connected with a bunch of people through my photos who found those photos, who just put a tag, Save Our Sirius, and
Sure.
conservators, unionists, all people who care about the past and what, I mean, the Sirius building was a way of keeping community housing in the rocks after they wanted to, or did succeed in getting rid of a lot of community housing, build them something they could be proud of and have as unique. And so the idea of getting rid of it was the antithesis of what should have been there. And now they're stuck with this thing that has apartments that's too small for rich people, but too expensive for poor people. So I don't know what's going to happen with it, as an example. But because a lot of I did a thing, I think it was last year, for Sydney University, where they wanted a lot of urban landscapes. And so there was they have an annual something of urbanism. I can't remember the name of the project. And so I just looked at my catalogue and I sent them photos of my catalogue and thought, okay, that's great and we love that, but we've now been thinking about it, that a lot of what you say in your tags is where is part of the value is as well. And so can you make reels and talk about, there was 3 topics that I talked about, I can't remember what they were. So I made reels and talked about issues with, as someone who has no vested interest beyond a love of Sydney, what individuals can do and say and think. And that has attracted to me, especially on Twitter, a lot of people who care about the urban environment and social housing and architects generally. And so that is another form of recognition that the work is seen as something that can make a difference, even if it's only in chronicling what's there and what. Like my photos of Walsh Bay isn't going to decide whether or not those piers continue. The economy and people making money is what's going to happen there. No matter what I wrote about Barangaroo, didn't stop all the towers going up.
No.
But I noted it and I showed it being built, and I talk about it when I take a nice shot and there's that thing there, and I always pass a comment, and 99% of the time I get, if people comment on it, they'll say they agree. And while I don't think I've swayed those people, it's a community that has come that I'm now part of, and that's a nice thing. I did take a shot of down in Jones Bay, looking out from the last, I can't remember what the wharf number is, but the last one where there's the peninsula that leads, it's called Darling Island, even though it's a peninsula now. And there's an old, what was a storehouse thing, it's been converted into flats, very expensive flats. And I made a comment about it would have been great to keep it in public hands, make it a museum or an art gallery or something. And quite a few people, entrepreneurial types, thought that was a very naive way of preserving things. The way to preserve it is to make it valuable, not to make it valueless, as though museums and art galleries
don't have any value.
And I tried to engage, but it was clear I wasn't going to get very far, so I just stopped. I also have no hesitation in blocking people. If people are rude or stupid, I just block, and then I never have to deal with them again.
Yeah, good on you. I'm exactly the same. I had somebody that thought it was okay to repost, or not just repost one of those shots, but actually edit it first and then repost the edit. And I was like, politely asked them, could you take that down, please? And then they came back and said, I was being very precious. Well, okay, call me precious. I don't care, but it's my
Precious
shot.
I
don't want you editing my stuff because it was a shitty edit.
Yeah, some people turn things that I've done into black and white and say, I think it looks better in black and white. And I just leave that going. Yeah, all you need to do is hit a button. Change it from colour to black and white.
The other thing that fascinates me, though, is a lot of people don't recognise that chronicling of change and chronicling of the time period that they're currently in. Taking those, you see those street shots from the 1940s and 50s and even further back when you go back into the early days of photography. And it's interesting. I see the city council or the state government or whatever using those, walking along there past the bottom of the harbour bridge this morning, and there's a big hoarding with 3.5, 4 foot high shots dating back to the 1850s or 60s, all the way through to the 1950s of that surrounding area, the Walsh Bay, Jones Bay, the Rocks area. And it's interesting that they've got that sort of displayed, but a lot of people don't put a lot of value on looking at where we are now, because in 20, 30, 40 years, that is going to be seen as a historical document. And for me, one of those important things that art can do and photography can do is to chronicle how we're living now for people in the future.
Absolutely. The only problem is because of digital assets, there are now so many more of them. And it was like the guy who, and no doubt it was a guy, who took a photo in 1850, had probably 100 shots that were in his catalogue of things that were really important. Yeah. I've got tens of thousands of shots that I think are great. Yeah. So I said to my wife,
you can over-chronicle, I guess.
I said, that's the hard drive, that one there, because it's all on a portable hard drive that gets backed up. So that's the one that's got all the shots. But I did at one stage contact the city, and because I live in the footprint of the council of the city of Sydney, and I said, look, I take lots of photographs. I don't need to, I'm happy to share them. A credit would be great, but you don't have to pay me for them. And they put me in touch with the head photographer, and of course he said, because he didn't want to lose any of his work, no, we're right, thank you very much. Which
we're all good.
I understood where it's coming from, because he doesn't lose his job. But I had this thing that in 50 years' time, if no one looks after it, it's gone. And it's something that says a lot.
Because the social media platforms that we're using today may go the way of MySpace and everything else that's gone before.
Yeah.
Within 10, 15 years, if we're lucky or if they're lucky. And so, that online storage, I don't think is necessarily, in terms of social media, necessarily got the legs that you need for some of those historical documents. And as you say, being digital, it's really hard to make sure that they get kept and maintained in a way that they can be used.
Yes. And my shots aren't compressed. The ones that are online are. Sometimes I think a beautiful sunrise, or before sun, a beautiful dawn, and I've captured this fantastic change of the hues of colour, and there's all these bands of different colour comes into it because they've compressed it.
Because of compression. Yeah.
Which makes my shot look a bit cheesy. But so whenever people, because I do sell a few directly to people that are interested, and they say, oh, I really like that shot. And I said, what you'd be getting would be a high-res version of that. So it'd be much, much better than that. And if it's printed on gloss paper, it will really pop compared to that.
Yeah, nice. You mentioned diversity. How do you think those cultural and social perspectives influence the way we perceive and take photos of landscapes? And I guess one of the questions I've got is, how do we foster greater diversity and inclusion in the field? Because there's a lot of middle-aged men and younger as well. I don't see as many middle-aged women, and I'm not saying there aren't any, but I just don't see as many, and I don't see as many younger women coming into it. How do you think that as photographers we can help foster that?
From the taking of photos side, not the subject. Yeah. I'm out really early. I see very few women out. They're mostly men, and it's only when the sun starts to come up that they're out for exercise. And so it's a safety issue. That's clearly it. And I've had a few people ask me can they come with me and watch me and learn? And some of them have been women. And I've only ever said yes once because she was someone who I vaguely know, and she's a musician, and she wanted to take photos to go with pieces of music. And so she showed me things that I'd taken photos of, and she said, "Can you take me on a tour and do that?" And of course, I didn't take money for it. And so if your nature is artistic enough, you'll push through. But it is hard, the safety thing at my time. Know that there's any difference in the chromosomes between a man and a woman that makes why men want to take photos more than women. I think possibly things like most of the housework is done by women, and it takes up time. Like I don't work anymore. My wife does. I do the. Sorry, you probably heard that ping then, did you?
Yep.
Yep. My wife works and I don't. So she still does all the cooking because she doesn't like my cooking. But I do the cleaning of dishes and clothes. But I find housework really boring. So she ends up doing a fair bit of that as well. So she has less free time than me by a long shot. So to go back to the question, I think it is, this sounds awful for men, I think we need to stop being selfish and create space for people to foster their interest. When women write to me and ask me, how did I do something? And some of the sites, I publish a little tile that says the ISO and the lens and blah, blah, blah. And people often ask, and it's more women than men ask questions about it. I think men tend to be more arrogant and they can't be told. But women ask, why F16? And I say, because it gives you a starburst with this particular lens. And so if you do a longer exposure to F16 and it's dark enough, it'll get that thing.
Yeah.
And so they're more inquisitive. So it should be more equity in it. We just, as men, need to be more generous, both in allowing the women around us more time to do creative things. And as someone who has some knowledge, don't make it a power thing, make it a sharing thing. I learnt a long time ago, my father taught me this. He said, when you give something, you give it. You don't have strings attached to say, I've done this, you don't have to be really grateful or tip your hat or whatever. It's about true generosity.
Yeah, I think that's a great attitude towards it. In terms of where you shoot, obviously it's around Sydney. Have you got any, you mentioned there's a few places that you keep going back to. Have you got any favourites, and what is it about that spot that keeps dragging you back there?
Not sadly, but both the Harbour Bridge and the Opera House are really good subjects.
Oh,
and
yeah.
they done to death.
I do them all the time.
Yeah. And so try to find angles on them. And before I got up on the Carl Expressway this morning, I was down around the Opera House and I managed to get a couple of things that I haven't seen before. So you'll probably see them over time. But it's also the luck of things like crepuscular rays. So the Man of War steps. So the Opera House is right beside you, but you take a shot of looking up the harbour. And I don't know what it does in the atmosphere to make it, but sometimes there's just these bright orange shards just shooting through. So that's a good spot for that, the Man of War steps. I really like that. To take photos of the city, I like cycling around past Mrs. Macquarie's chair, down around to Camp Cove or Farm Cove. I can't remember. The one next to Botanical Gardens. And the city spends a lot of money on lights when they don't need to. So at 4:30, it looks fantastic. It's really nice lit up. What they don't spend money on is the Harbour Bridge and the Opera House. So they're always quite dimly lit, but we can get ways around that. So that's a good spot. Lavender Bay, I really like. It's more of an effort to get there. And Blues Point is also a good spot. And one that I wouldn't normally share, but you seem like such a nice fellow. At Berries Bay, there's a Berries Bay lookout that is the best views of Sydney at dawn. And even if sometimes I'm going, I'm so tired, I can't get there. I'll catch the train to Waverton and then cycle from there. But that's a good spot. But I've seen maybe 10 times I've gone there, maybe 10 other photographers during that time. I normally don't see other photographers, so that must be a spot that is known as you can get some really good shots.
Yeah, I've shot from there myself. I've done it a couple of times. Very occasionally see other photographers there, but not very often. But
all the other spots I'm at, unless it's and just past the Harbour Bridge, that view of the Opera House, going around under the Harbour Bridge, that's where I see a lot of photographers.
Yeah.
And the pier that runs next to the hotel at that spot, the Park Hyatt, there's always a lot, especially on weekends.
Yeah,
and in winter, which is a good spot, in winter on the International Passenger Terminal wharf. But in summer, there's a boat comes practically every day, and so it's locked off.
yeah.
People accessing it. And I like Bronte Beach is great, and the pool, the rock pool there is
Bronte, yeah, that's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. And last week I did the big cycle all the way down to Malabar and got some nice shots from there as well. So ocean pools I really like a lot.
Yeah, they're one of my favourite subjects as well. I'm very often found around the edges of a pool somewhere on the coast.
I think because there are some expats who follow me because it makes them, they like to remember.
Yeah.
All of them, not all of them, a lot of them comment about the East Coast ocean pools, that there's nothing like that anywhere else in the world. It's
very rare. There's a couple, I think, somewhere in Portugal or Spain, one of those, there's a couple of places there that have something similar. They're not quite the same, but yeah, there's very few that have, certainly nowhere near as many as Sydney. I think there's about 35 of them from memory, just on the Sydney.
Down the south coast where you have to go down the side of a hill to get to it.
Yeah.
I think it's called Blue Pool. I can't remember. I can't remember the town that it's at.
Down at Bermagui, yeah.
Yeah, and there's so to get some great shots just looking down into the pool.
Absolutely. What's your most memorable photography experience?
It is one that people have hastened before. So I was on the piece of grass there's the museum, the art gallery, not the art gallery, Mitchell Library, and then there's a road of traffic going into the city, and there's an island, and then a road of traffic going out of the city. I'm on the island, and it's equivalent to night time. It's 4:30 in the morning, middle of winter, and I set up my Zoom, and I can see that there's someone sleeping on the step.
Okay. Yep.
And I focus well, take a photo, and get home, look at it, and fix it up to make it look what I was after. And I didn't look close enough, but you can, if you zoom in, because I did such good focus, you can see the person's face.
Oh.
For me, the photo spoke, and it was an Indigenous person. The photo spoke really vividly of this person's life, having to sleep on a step under bright lights, and that's what their life is.
Yep.
But I got a lot of criticism because I showed the person's face.
Yeah.
I don't know that I could recognise that person, but you could see their face. So people said I invaded their privacy. Did I ask permission first? All the typical questions, not necessarily photographer questions, but people who care about other people's rights. And I took on board what they said, because for them that was very important.
Yeah.
And I take homeless people occasionally, but most of the time they have their heads covered because of either mosquitoes in summer or cold in winter. And it was just, I hadn't even processed that I should be looking for whether or not this person's face was there.
Yeah.
But it was such a great shot that I did publish it, and it is a great shot, but it evoked lots of negative feedback that I can understand why they did it.
Yeah. It's totally okay if you'd approach them and they said, yeah, sure, take the photo. But
he was asleep as well.
That's it. You don't want to wake him. How about horror stories? Have you had any dramas?
Yeah, quite a few dramas. Drunk lads, because I have a helmet on when I'm cycling, and I had people whack me on the head and stuff like that. But the one that got the best result, I was taking a photo of the Reserve Bank. And I've had some running with security, once at the Reserve Bank and other places. Security just don't know what the rules are. But anyway, taking a photo of Reserve Bank from public land, and so it's a long exposure because it's not lit very well there. And it was doing my 3 bracket shots. The first one correct exposure, the second one overexposed, the third one underexposed. And so we're into the second shot of the one that has the shutter open the longest. And I can see, sadly, living in the city, I know what different kinds of addiction looks like. I know what heroin addiction looks like. I know what alcohol addiction looks like. And I know what methamphetamine addiction looks like, and it was heading towards me.
Yep.
And I'm going, man, just stagger and walk around me. And as he got close, he went, what's that? Put his hand out to the camera. And so I grabbed it at the same time. We had a little tussle, and then I shouted abuse and he went away. I went home and I I processed the thing, and it was perfect. Everything was clear, and then there's this wildness in the middle of it, and it was a great shot.
Wow.
So out of adversity came a piece of art.
Nice. What do you think the practice of photography's taught you about the world?
Because of the kinds of things that are my subject matter, it's made me really cherish solitude and appreciate being by myself. I'm very comfortable by myself. It makes me appreciate history a lot more than I used to. It makes me appreciate quietness as well, because a lot of my career has been about noise, and it's quiet when I'm out. So stillness, quietness, serenity, and looking for joy. And I suppose the touched on this, that I'll use an analogy. If you're going on a holiday to somewhere and you research it within an inch of its life because you can on the internet,
Yep.
when you get there, you may do all the things that you've researched, and you go, oh, I did all that. But if you go there with much less informed understanding of where you're going, you will have more joy in the finding of things. And so that's what photography can do for me, by not setting up the result before I go, but by being open to what can happen. Then I get more fulfilled in life.
Yeah, getting that spontaneity as opposed to what you predict is going to be there because you've over-researched it. Yeah.
And if people do that and enjoy it, that's fine. But for me, I like that spontaneity.
Yeah, no, that's nice. Are you straight home when you finish your ride, hook up the camera to the computer, get the images down, and you're straight into editing, or are you one to leave them for a little bit?
Because I don't take as many photos as I used to, because I found I was just overwhelmed and spending all the time editing. So I take between 15 and 30 shots that I will edit. So, and all of them 3 photos each because of the thing. And so I'll go, what do I think? So I'll suck them all into the machine as soon as I get home, and while I'm putting my bike away and the like, and then I'll look at them and I'll merge them into the 3 shots into the individuals. That doesn't take very long. And I look at them and go, what was the one that made me feel that this typifies what I saw around this morning? And then I'll work on that one. And then as I'm having my breakfast, I post it to all the different sites. And then later in the day, I'll go back and finish the rest. But if I leave it for the next day, then there's a whole load of fresh ones. And so and
you're on the treadmill.
Yeah, exactly. I do enjoy the editing, but the taking, and not even actually, the taking is more exciting than the editing. The editing just makes me, as I said, realize what I saw, but the taking of it is the exciting part.
Yeah. Getting out and being out there in the early morning light. Yeah.
And strange enough, people say, winter, how do you do it? Winter's possibly the best time because you just got to wear the right clothes.
Absolutely. Yeah. You just dress appropriately and you're fine.
Yeah. And there are even fewer people out then. So that's great.
That's exactly right. Yeah. It's one of the reasons why I'm up and out early in the morning too, is because there's nobody else around, and you got that view mostly to yourself. To be honest, most of the people that I share it with are rock fishermen.
And they like to be kept to themselves as well. I don't find them particularly
they tend to be fairly quiet and not interested in interrupting anyone else either.
Yeah.
Where do you see photography going, and what do you see as the biggest challenge for photography?
I think with the improvement in quality of phone photography, that it put it under quite a bit of threat, that it was just like when everyone became a DJ in the mid-90s, so mid-80s, well, late 80s, when techno started, which started in the late 80s, and then by the mid-90s, everyone was a DJ. And it lowered both how much you got paid, it lowered the quality, lowered the standards, all of that. So I thought that's what phone photography would do, but it hasn't. Thankfully, phone photography has turned into Selfie City, which I have very little interest in. In fact, I took one photo when I was in Italy with my wife, last year, and she's insisted on it. And it hasn't. It's still in the camera of my phone. It hasn't left it yet because I wouldn't post a photo of she and I because it just looks showing off Ponte Vecchio or whatever we were.
Sure.
So I think it will continue to have the role of the phone, and that's just to churn and burn and sadly fill up data space. It probably makes it more difficult for the more quality photos to be taken.
Yeah.
I have the second version of the camera I use is number 2. That's number 5, and I haven't looked to update because number 2 does me fine. It delivers what I want from a camera. Yes, I could spend, instead of spending $2,000, I could spend $10,000, and it would probably be a bit better, quite a bit better. And there's nothing wrong with that, except it's not light enough to cycle with, and I'm not necessarily as skilled as someone to be able to take advantage of it quite potentially as well.
Yeah.
So I think that the quality will still incrementally improve, but not dramatically. So I think it'll just be down to people wanting to take things because of their beautiful nature, and people who get paid to take photos of clothes, food, and portrait work. So there'll obviously still be a future in making money out of it for those people who do that area. And for people who do what you and I do, it is a hobby. So only the passionate people will be there. And I prefer to be in the pool of passionate people than in the pool of professional people if it means what is life about. Yeah, I could tell you that I was lucky. I'm in one of those superannuation schemes because the ABC was part of government, and so I get paid a pension. It's called a pension, but I get paid a fortnightly thing that's enough to live on. Can't travel the world on it, but I did work before that, so I've got some money there. Yeah. And I prefer to live my life a bit smaller than some people might, but to enjoy it every day, because there's no point slogging away. Some of the people who react to my photos and they say, how do you have time to do this? And I talk about it, but people mostly from overseas. And there was a fellow who has moved here from London. It's actually my pet, because my dog had something wrong with it. And he said London was full of people that hate their lives and hate what they're doing and do it for 12 hours a day. Yeah. And I can't think of anything worse.
I'm the same.
Enjoying your life. Like I have steak maybe once every 2 or 3 weeks, maybe. And it makes me enjoy my steak when I have it, but I'm fine with having chicken curry.
Yeah, that's the way. Are there any photographers out there that you think I should have a chat to on the podcast? I'm
a bit bad in that I use social media like I used to be as a broadcaster, where I just send things out. So I don't actually follow many photographers.
Sure.
If they follow me and I look at their work and I go, there's something there, I'll follow them back, but I'll only, if it comes up in my feed, I don't go looking for them.
Yeah, right.
No, I don't think I'm going to be any use to you.
That's okay, no problem. I've got a long list anyway. So
there's a famous photographer who's not financially sponsored, but put his name behind an exhibition they did, the first solo exhibition, and his name is Peter Elfers, E-L-F-E-R, and he is a landscape photographer on a grand scale. He does when the Santa floods and all that kind of thing. And he used to be a paparazzi kind of photographer in the 80s. And so he'd be in clubs that I'd be at. And he's a very reasonable human being. He talks even more than I do. He's on, he's definitely on Facebook. That's where I have most of my interactions with him.
Sure.
So I would highly recommend you talk to him.
All right, I'll go looking for him then. I haven't seen his stuff on. I do know his name and I've seen some of his work, but I just haven't seen him around on social media. Haven't gone looking for him specifically though either.
He lives in the Blue Mountains and he's been posting things like his renovation and such. He has a book that I can't remember the name of it, which is aerial photography of floods, and they're not disaster floods that made the landscape come to life, and it was just mind blowing.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you for that. I've got one more question for you, and for a lot of my listeners, it's one of the most important ones that we've got to get to the bottom of across the photography community. Do you like pineapple on pizza?
No, definitely not, ever.
Fair enough.
My daughter does. but she's a blight on society.
Thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me. It's been wonderful getting to know you a little bit better. Where can people find your work?
So on Twitter, I'm Tim Ritchie. On Facebook, I'm Tim Ritchie. On Instagram, I'm tim.ritchie.photography.
Okay.
I'm on Tumblr, Flickr, UPic, the new one, Matador, whatever it's called.
Yep.
The one that's going to take over after
Mastodon.
Elon Musk. That's it. After Elon Musk buggers it. I find that people can't really find you there. I don't have many followers there. But so anywhere, I'm on all over the place. Even LinkedIn. I find LinkedIn people and Twitter people who are, LinkedIn people are supposed to be professionals, but they, on some posts of other people, they criticize and say, what's that got to do with work? But the people who I've connected with, who I used to work with or whatever, understand that creativity is work. It's just can also be fun, but it's as good as someone writing a important document about reconciliation or whatever. Art is important.
Fair enough. All right. Thank you very much for talking to me, Tim. It's been wonderful.
You're welcome, Grant.
Thanks again for listening to Landscape Photography World. I hope you enjoyed the show, and keep listening because I'll be joined by some great guests in upcoming episodes. You can find my work in this podcast at grantswinburnephotography.com. I'm also on Vero, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. I'm Grant Swinburne. Hope to see you out shooting soon.